New York State has some of the most ambitious climate policies in the nation. Its policy leaders seek to sharply cut carbon emissions from the power sector and bring on large amounts of new, zero-emitting electric generation. But recently, the New York Independent System Operator, which runs the state's grid and competitive power markets, warned that fossil-powered plants are being driven into retirement faster than they can be replaced by new resources that are capable of providing 24/7 service. And that could spell trouble for keeping the lights on. Welcome to Energy Solutions, a podcast from the Electric Power Supply Association, where we showcase the voices and stories behind America's changing electric grid. I'm your host, Todd Snitchler, EPSA's president and CEO. New York is not alone. PJM Interconnection, which provides power for 13 states and the District of Columbia, issued a similar report this year. It's a reminder that as we look to the future, we can't lose sight of what is needed to keep the lights on today and likely for decades to come. Our guest this episode is Commissioner Diane Burman, who has served on the New York State Public Service Commission for nearly 10 years. She joined us to talk about the current energy policy landscape in New York, her priorities as a regulator, and what other policymakers can learn from the Empire State. Thanks, Diane, for joining us today. I am always torn whether I should call you Diane or Commissioner, so I will probably use both during our conversation today. But we're delighted to finally have you join us on the podcast and have the opportunity to chat with you a little bit. So welcome and thanks for joining us.
Oh, thank you so much.
So, Commissioner, I have tried to do math, which I know I'm not very good at, but if I'm doing it correctly, you've served on the New York Public Service Commission for nearly 10 years, which in the world of utility regulators is a lifetime. So first, congratulations.
Thank you.
But secondly, this is really building on your prior experience where you've been involved in public utility issues and state policy. You've been really a roll up your sleeves regulator. So what got you interested and why did you take the job in the first place and what keeps you on the job now?
So first of all, thank you for this opportunity. I am in my 10th year. I came in June of 2013 to the commission, and I'm serving in my second term of the commission. I don't think anyone grows up wanting to be an energy regulator, but I would say that I think something that was really pivotal in my childhood kind of stuck with me. And then I think this is kind of sort of how I landed in the energy space throughout my career. I was a 10-year-old during the New York City blackout of 1977.
Oh, yeah.
And actually in the hospital for special surgery, having major surgery. And my room was next to the nurse's station because I was in a critical care situation and I couldn't walk. And when the blackout happened, you could hear lots of commotion, both at the nurse's station and throughout the hospital, but outside. And so for a 10-year-old, it was very scary with the lights out. The generating lights did go on, but there was a lot of talk at the nurse's station with the nurses, the doctors, the different emergency response folks about the fact that they were very afraid that they were going to run out of generation and that they were having to triage how they were going to move patients and who needed to stay and who had to be moved and how that was going to happen. And for me, it was really sort of scary. And then hearing sort of the leadership, right? So you would think that there would be certain people, in my mind, nurses and doctors were the leaders, and they're never afraid. But here you could hear the panic, and you could also hear how people were stepping up to calm folks and take control. And for me, that left sort of a pivotal mark. The lights staying on is really important and critical. It's not just about, being in your house or your business and having the lights go out. There are literally other things connected to it and life and death decisions by having the lights go out. So if the lights go out, they've got to come back on ASAP. And that sort of marked a lot of sort of how I think I found myself in the energy space. When I was in the Attorney General's office, I dealt with oil spill unit issues, looking at environmental issues and economic issues, which led me to the State Economic Development Agency, where I was involved in being the liaison for the Commissioner of Economic Development, working with the other energy agencies in the state on our first legislative state energy plan that was in 2002. And all of the different sort of decisions for me, really, I got sort of wonky and really liked dealing with the energy issues and the policy issues, but also really looking at everybody needs to collaborate in a way that makes sense and helping to figure out the path forward. And so I had the opportunity to work as special counsel to the chairman at the commission for a number of years before I went to be chief counsel in the legislature. And again, dealing with a lot of energy issues kept coming up and kept being sort of my go-to and in liking that, which is kind of how I came then to have the opportunity to get nominated and then confirmed, nominated by the governor and then confirmed by the state Senate to come to the PSC as a commissioner. So I've been here nearly 10 years, but I have prior experience as a staffer. And what keeps me on the job really is that I truly think this is an exciting time to be here. There's an evolving role for regulators, which really needs to have a hands-on approach in how we help to facilitate our state energy policies in a way that makes sense. So my job as a regulator is really to understand the nature of the vulnerabilities and overall risks focused in our energy transition and help balance our policies and our priorities really responsibly and in a way that doesn't put at risk the lights going out and ensuring that the lights stay on and we manage how to deal with that risk.
Well, I think that I didn't know that story, and that is an incredibly personal example of the importance of reliability at a young age that clearly stuck with you as you have been engaged on this. And I will tell the listeners that I met Commissioner Burman about a hot second after I think she was confirmed. And true to form, her first comment was, "Nice to meet you. What can I do to help?" And so I think that speaks well, Diane, of your commitment to get engaged and to work on the issues and really look for solutions, which is important, as you have noted, for any number of reasons. So you mentioned that there's a lot happening, and I couldn't agree with you more in the energy space right now. What are you thinking about both at the state level, but as you look across the country and your engagement with NARUC, which we'll talk about a little bit, what are the top priorities that you see both for you as a regulator in New York, but more broadly for regulators across the country?
So I think New York, like most other states, have a public service commission where our primary mission is to ensure affordable, safe, secure, and reliable access to electric, gas, steam, telecommunications, and water services for New York State's residential and business consumers while protecting the natural environment. And we are focused on how to stimulate effective competitive markets for clean, renewable, and distributed energy resources that benefit New York consumers, as well as product and service innovations. And so I kind of look at it as we have a challenge and we have goals for our New York State energy policy, and that's to balance reliability, environmental sustainability, and the cost of energy supply to meet the needs and demands of consumers and to support the growth of our state's economy. Now, doing that at this time means that we need to effectively manage our grid transition and how we integrate renewables without putting at risk reliability, safety, or affordability. We also have to look at the extensive capital requirements of transmission and distribution system expansion, because New York will need significant, like other states, will need significant grid alterations to do this. And power demand is going to rise. New technologies will need to be integrated into renewables. But we have to do this while carefully maintaining reliability and public safety. If we close some of these existing resources, what that means if the new renewables are not there to step up at that time. It's further complicated by the electrification of both transportation and buildings. So we have to really also look, because we're going to be going with systems with increasing amounts of intermittent resources. We're going to be looking at a complete change in terms of how we are operating. So our continued development of our existing planning processes and reliability, we have to understand the system impacts of retiring resources, examining the status of essential reliability services, including ramping capability, frequency response, and inertia. Mm-hmm. And we have to keep in mind our history as a state that has had great success with our fuel diversity. But we also have to keep in mind lessons of learning from other states like California and Texas, and recognize that we do not want to be in the situation where we are primarily relying on flashlights, candlelight, and portable generation for our energy future.
Yeah, I can assure you living in 1870 is not what anyone is interested in doing these days. There was a recent article that referred to you as a frequent voice of dissent, if I'm quoting them correctly, on the commission. And I'm wondering if you think that's a fair characterization. And also, secondly, why is pushback important?
So I think it's a great question. I would say that for those not close to the work of the commission and energy regulation in general, I think it's easy to characterize me as a frequent voice of dissent, but I'm not sure that's fair or accurate. I kind of look at it as, until this role as a commissioner, I always worked for decision makers. I was never a decision maker. And I appreciated the decision makers who made decisions based on the facts, based on clear analysis, and did so thinking that they were making a decision that they felt was the right decision within their framework. And so I view my role as one that I have to be that thoughtful decision maker that is really trying to do the public good and to abide by, I have a fiduciary responsibility to the ratepayers of New York. And so my role has to be one that is looking at sort of due diligence and viewing things from all the many changing variables that are happening in the energy sector right now. The only way we're going to get to quality, prudent, and rational solutions is by having discussion around differing views and opinions. If we don't allow this level of dialogue and exchange, I believe everyone suffers. So I recognize that there are many moving parts within the energy sector and no one has the expertise in all areas. So I ask a lot of questions. I push back when I think it's appropriate. And I want to make sure that I am truly understanding, there are many times where there are well-intentioned, whether it's legislation or regulation, but once you go to implement that, again, it comes back to, if you're actually going backwards, if you're actually thinking that you're going to, help reduce emissions, but you're actually increasing emissions, it's not helpful, right? If you're actually not focusing on the amount of costs and who's going to bear the risks, we're going to have problems. So I kind of look at it as, ultimately, I think of it as I have a voice to make sure that we're ensuring reliability is maintained and public safety is paramount. And we really need to make sure that understanding that this transition is complicated and we should not make it more complicated by just saying, yep, I agree, without anything else other than that. So I take it seriously and look to what's in the best interests for all stakeholders.
Yeah, as I'd put my former regulator hat on, that sounds like informed decision-making as opposed to rubber stamping, which I think is ultimately the job of the regulator. So You've mentioned now a couple of times how New York is actively working to aggressively decarbonize the grid, and that there's clearly state policies in play. As I think, if my numbers are wrong, I'm sure you'll correct me, but I think New York still has a significant amount of generation that is natural gas-fired generation that keeps the lights on and ensures reliability. But there's policy choices being made to change that. Can you kind of walk us through the policy landscape in New York?
So New York is, we do have aggressive climate goals, and we have significant mandates under our legislation, and it's called the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act.
Mm-hmm.
And it really directs New York State's agencies and authorities to work collaboratively to achieve net zero greenhouse gas emission economy-wide by 2050, with a minimum of 85% reduction in greenhouse gas at 1990 levels by 2050. And we have a focus on greenhouse gas reductions for the electric sector, and specific goals are at least 70% of New York's electricity must come from renewable energy sources such as wind and solar by 2030.
Mm-hmm.
And the state's power system must be 100% carbon-free by 2040. And then we have another layer of mandates on the installation of 9 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2035, 6 gigawatts of distributed solar by 2025, and 3 gigawatts of energy storage by 2030. Now, our climate goals are not dissimilar to other states, especially in the Northeast, who
Mm-hmm.
are trying to achieve, well-meaning climate-focused goals, right? The issue really comes in that, taking a step back, the most recent statewide greenhouse gas emissions report in December 2022 showed that emissions associated with the electricity sector decreased by 46% from 1990 through 2019. So we were working very well at trying to reduce that. The challenge we have is that there are folks, well-meaning, who want to sort of pick and choose the favored fuel or the favored
Mm-hmm.
technologies that I think is actually causing some challenges, because even though there's a focus on let's get off gas, our reliance on natural gas for winter electric generation has only grown.
Right.
And it's grown to the point that it's outpaced available pipeline capacity, which was built mainly for heating needs.
Mm-hmm.
And so these pipeline constraints actually have in the system contributed to the price volatility that exists. So I look at it as we have a strong need for fuel diversity as we focus on decarbonization. And our sort of fuel diversity across the board can be done in a way that's actually helping enable more penetration of renewables while helping to ensure that we are having the backstop that we need with other fuels like gas that can help ensure that we are efficiently addressing some of our system needs and constraints. So I do worry that that folks are actually perhaps going to cause a disruption for us in a way that, we're going to go backwards if we don't address sort of the need that we have currently.
And I know I've heard our colleague at IPNY, the Independent Power Producers of New York, Gavin Donahue, talk about the amount and volume of new generation resources that will be needed. And it's a sizable number as New York electrifies. And I wonder, are the timelines achievable? I'm certainly not asking you to answer that because that's beyond your purview, but it does raise the question of our aspirational goals getting ahead of operational realities. And what I'm hearing you say is that those have to be more tightly aligned, because picking arbitrary technologies or deadlines doesn't ensure reliability. And that's job one. And then, of course, people have to be able to pay for this. I mean, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think that's what I've heard you say.
Yeah, so it's interesting, right? Because as a commissioner, I'm responsible for the oversight of the reliability of the grid. So we have to assess what we did, what we're doing, and what we will be doing, and are we moving forward in a way that's helpful. So we have to recognize that we have to plan in a way that makes sense. If we are only seeking to fulfill the state policies to meet the timelines without recognizing that there may need to be some further refinement and pivoting in what we are deeming to be successful at that time, right? So we're not going to be able to meet the timelines if we are siloing out, those we perceive as solutions we don't want to have. We're not going to be able to be successful if we do all this and we put at risk reliability and we put at risk the costs. So I kind of look at it as we need to provide certainty on our state climate goals and how we're accommodating and embracing the markets, in particular as part of the clean energy transition. And as we transition to a cleaner electric grid and significant reductions of emissions, we have to ensure we're maintaining affordability and reliability of our energy system for all consumers. But the only way we can do that is if we are actually open and transparent and mindful of the planning that needs to go into that, the mindful of the changing energy mix, extreme weather, the need to allow technological innovations and sort of an all hands on approach, because it's too important.
And I think you kind of lead into the next question I was thinking about as you were answering, which is how are those policy objectives being balanced with reliability needs? I mean, the New York ISO just published a report about a month ago or so, very similar to one that was issued by PJM in about the same time frame, that says that rapid electrification and the retirement of dispatchable resources are putting reliability in jeopardy. And as I noted before, and you've been very clear about, that's really not negotiable. So how are you thinking about balancing those needs?
So I think it's excellent that you're raising this issue. First of all, I want to say unequivocally, I fully agree with the New York ISO report that says that, we need a balanced approach to a clean and reliable grid, that we are rapid electrification and retiring a natural gas plants too early is going to put reliability in jeopardy. So I strongly encourage everyone to read their most recent Power Trends of 2023, because I think there are some key messages in there. I think there are some key learning opportunities. And I think, again, sort of going back to myself as being considered a frequent voice of dissent, the ISO raising this issue of putting at risk and the concern with transmission security and our margins perhaps not being sufficient for the state, especially in New York City, to face reliability risks as we move forward, is not a voice of dissent. They're all in on how they can help prioritize clean energy production and a rapid transition away from fossil fuels. But they recognize the imperative nature of it, that during this time that we have to maintain an adequate supply necessary to meet a growing demand for electricity, and that achieving this balance is really the central challenge for all of us. The transition's very technically complicated, and we walk a tightrope keeping things stable while pursuing our ambitious decarbonization targets. And I kind of look at it as the ISO, as well as our New York State Reliability Council and the PSC, really are kind of working together in the important role in this transition as reminding folks about the reliability issues, but also looking at it from the perspective of that it is important that we have sufficient flexible and dispatchable generation resources, and we have to encourage further discussions on the types of flexible and dispatchable resources that will comply with our state policy goals. And so this integration of renewable resources increases the need for balancing resources to meet forecasted ramping requirements.
Mm-hmm.
And so it can't be ignored. And the physics and engineering principles cannot be ignored. And too often, we hear, well, they're just not, for this. I totally disagree with that. I think that they are all in, and anyone who's raising issues is really trying to be helpful in recognizing the challenges that we see. So I think for me, contingency planning, system planning, looking at all the different issues with reliability and making sure that we have the technical and engineering resources is so critical. And I'm just really happy that we have the New York ISO, as well as the New York State Reliability Council, as well as others raising these issues. It's not dissimilar to some of the challenges in other RTOs or ISO areas. It's really kind of looking at how do we help have long-term success when we're focused on accommodating state policies that could profoundly disrupt the energy system that we know. And it really means that we have to have those folks like the ISO who are there to help us in ensuring that we are making the right decisions and raising the challenges that may come at putting at risk reliability.
So you talked about a lot of things there that sound like opportunity to me. And of course, as you know, EPSA supports competitive wholesale markets, and competitive power suppliers like our members are always looking to lean into opportunities. So what role do you see for competitive power suppliers like our members and IPNI's members in building a stronger energy future in New York?
So I think you have a really important role, and one that, for me, recognizes that private investment is needed to manage the magnitude of the change being considered. I really believe that your members, we need you to run your plants efficient, reliably, and safely. But beyond that, your members offer a key perspective in the debates on these market structures themselves, reminding policymakers like myself of the benefits of competitive markets, and by bringing creative solutions to the task of adopting the markets to an era of increasing government interference, micromanaging, and mandates, even if well-meaning. So your members have an important resource, bring an important resource in New York, as well as other states in the regions that allow competitive market structures. So I really feel comfortable that we see a future for EPSA's members to make strategic investments that help our state continue to strike a healthy balance between reliability and affordability while keeping us on our present decarbonization trajectory.
And I think I'll take the opportunity to remind listeners that, one of the primary benefits of competitive generators is that we don't have captive customers that are obligated to pay costs for investments. That's shifted to investors and shareholders, which means they bear the risk of investments, good or bad. And with so much coming on the horizon in New York and frankly in other jurisdictions, that's a lot of money that will be required to be spent in order to deliver some of these outcomes. And if you can shift that to people who are best able to bear the risk as opposed to captive customers, we think that's the better approach. And I won't ask you to opine on that, but clearly that's one of the value propositions that we bring. So let me telescope back just a little bit, because you've also been very engaged on the national level. You've been a very active participant at the National Association of Regulatory Utility Commissioners, or as we like to call it, NARUC. You've been a chair of the committee. You've been on the board. I think I'm interested in what are some of the commonalities and differences you see with state regulators? I mean, not every state is similarly situated to New York, but everybody's got a similar set of obligations when it comes to reliability and just and reasonable rates. How do you look at working across the country with your peers, and how do you find value in some of the conversations that you have, with your NARUC colleagues?
So I think it's really important to engage not only within my state, but regionally and then nationally and actually internationally as well.
Mm-hmm.
And NARUC provides, National Association of Regulatory Utility Commissioners, is really our membership organization representing all of the state public service commissions who regulate utilities that provide essential services such as energy, telecommunications, power, water, and transportation.
Yep.
And so most state commissioners are appointed to their position by their governor or legislature, and then there are some states that are elected either by the public or in 2 states by the General Assembly. But all of us really have a mission of serving the public interest by improving the quality and effectiveness of public utility regulation. So NARUC provides a forum for us to come together, to become more educated, to help, sort of look at what's happening across the country, what perhaps we can bring back to our states. And for me, the things that I look at when I go is also about trying to understand what my role as a regulator is in advocating for state goals, in helping to ensure that we're raising up our voice, but also what we should avoid, right? And so one of the challenges also is not getting caught up in following what I call the shiny object press releases. So just because New York is doing something doesn't mean another state should just take that from a cookie cutter perspective and dump it into their state and try to stand it up. And just because New York is doing something doesn't mean that we're also not trying to struggle with our own challenges and continually improve. And really, continuous improvement in the energy market is really important. So I think it's really important that we are being responsive to our state goals, but we're also making sure that we are prudently balancing those policies with the reliability needs, and also, frankly, asking who bears the risk, who bears the cost. How do we address that? It's not sustainable for all of the different state decarbonization policies if we expect it to be borne by the ratepayers. And if we are talking about, and we are, about the massive amounts of investments that we need, that just can't come alone from the federal government and or the state. It's also got to come from private investment. And if we in New York want private investment here, we also have to recognize that there's a need for a return on that investment and regulatory certainty. If you're making decisions on, a 20 or 30-year time frame, you can't worry that every 2-3 years, there's a new, regulator who comes in and changes that landscape. There needs to be, really systematic short and long-term certainty in what we're doing and helping to ensure that we're doing it in a way that is making sure that everyone across the board is benefiting.
We certainly agree with you there. Certainty is kind of the key underpinning for investment. So how do you think, and you raised an issue in your just a moment ago about some of the federal and state related issues. And of course, for anyone that watches the energy space, it's clear that there is some state and federal tension between state policies and FERC decisions and litigation that has resulted from some of that. From your seat, how do you think state specific issues and policies do or should inform federal policies, or are they divorced from each other and states do what they want and the feds do what they want, and then we'll sort it out in the end?
So it's a complicated question with a complicated answer. So let me take a step back.
Okay.
I've been on the commission, this is my 10th year, but I also had several years as a staffer. Since if you add up my time as a staffer and my time as a commissioner, I've gone through close to 11 different chairs of the commission. That's not dissimilar to other states. There's a huge turnover. The life of a state energy regulator, they say, is averaged, 3 to 4 years. So I guess I've reached my useful life.
Yes.
But if you look at FERC, since I've been on the commission, the entire FERC has changed several times.
Yeah.
And it's still changing, right? We have one vacancy, perhaps, another vacancy or a reappointment. And then we also have, sort of a time frame of the terms ending for others. So when you look at that, you have to also recognize, again, regulatory certainty is important. The federal government and the state governments working together can be helpful. State and local policy decisions clearly must be taken into account by federal agencies when they're making their own policy decisions. Mm-hmm. Now, this manifests directly in citing major energy infrastructure projects. Mm-hmm. FERC has delegated permitting authority to the states, of course, but in New York, environmental regulators are highly unlikely to permit new natural gas generating facilities or pipelines. So agencies like DOE or FERC, they have to be aware of those state energy policies when planning or modeling future energy systems or projects. And they also have to sort of look at what that means, not only for the state and reliability, not only for the state from an economic perspective, but nationally. What one state does affects another state, not just regionally, but across the board. And so they have to be, I look at it as planning and modeling future energy systems or projects are really needing to be collaborative in the way that people are focusing on what it means. Mm-hmm. So states that are subsidizing certain technologies like wind or solar are going to need a tremendous amount of new transmission facilities. States that utilize integrated resource planning, they depend on federal agencies to be responsive to their decision with respect to siting new projects and setting rates. I think that there is a need for us to talk about the tensions. There's a need for us to try to figure out how we can also look at what it means and challenges and barriers. The states, have a role, but the federal government also needs to be able to look at what this looks like regionally, taking into account regional differences, and federal policy making efforts are important. So federal government has an important role in determining the need for new infrastructure. Individual states sometimes cannot see the regional need for a project, and there needs to be state input on mitigating impacts to be considered in this federal government role in permitting and siting. And FERC, has to look at how they can help with maintaining reliability, including the natural gas system. Perhaps more frequent communications on plans for modernization by pipelines, perhaps looking at the role in their wholesale markets with, authentication for something like emerging certified natural gas markets, perhaps, looking at how to help regional natural gas and the tracking that's done. So how folks are buying and selling energy is important to look at.
So I'm trying to be mindful of your time, of course, and I have a couple of quick questions that I'm just curious because I know you are watching around the corner or over the horizon on what may be coming. What technologies are you watching with interest now, whether it's hydrogen or small modular reactors or others? Are there things that you think you're paying particular attention to?
Yes, so I'm paying attention to all of it, right? But I think that we do have a docket here on dispatchable emission-free resources technology and what that would look like, what that would mean for if we defining dispatchable emission-free resources and that would help to maintain reliability and also meet the needs of our climate goals. The challenge is also that I look at it as all hands-on approach, all opportunities for us to be flexible in those definitions. We're going to look at what comes into the record and make determinations on that. Part of the challenge, though, is that we also have to recognize that we're working through those technologies, and part of it is how can we enable those technologies? How can we look at what will be long-term cost effective and not be prescriptive as a government regulator in really siloing that? I really believe that part of the things that we should look to historically has been that the competitive markets themselves have helped to unlock these solutions. And we do recognize that technology, new technologies, is going to be extremely important for us to be achieving what we need to achieve.
Well, with that, I'm going to ask, I think, maybe 3 or 4 rapid fire questions, and we will give you back the balance of your day. So, Commissioner, Mets or Yankees?
Well, both. So,
that is such a political answer.
That's a complicated question. I'm a Long Islander, but I actually knew the announcer for the Yankees, Bob Shepard, who's since passed, and he actually took me under his wing for 3 weeks one summer. And if not for him, I never would have gotten, when I tried out for softball, I never would have gotten into it because he helped me. So yeah,
as a Red Sox fan, I won't hold that against you. Jets or Giants?
The Giants.
And is New York ever going to pass a carbon tax?
I think that we're working through a cap and trade investment proposal. It's complicated. It continues to be. And the question really shouldn't be, is New York going to? It's that, if whatever we're doing, are we doing it in a prudent and a responsible way that's taking into account what needs to be done so that we don't go backwards in just setting up something that's unrealistic and not workable.
With that, Commissioner Burman, thank you very much for spending some time with us today. We certainly appreciate your perspective, and I think you've raised a lot of issues that we need to be considering, and you do it from a seat with, and all joking aside, you have more experience than probably 90+% of the commissioners who sit on state commissions across the country, with nearly 10 years of experience. And we certainly value your contribution and appreciate the work that you do on behalf of both your state, but also the utility regulatory community more broadly.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciated the opportunity to speak to you.
We've got links to New York's Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, along with the New York ISO's Power Trends Report on our podcast webpage at epsa.org. You'll also find more news and information about how energy policy impacts electric reliability and what's needed to deliver solutions that work. Thank you for listening to Energy Solutions. If you like this episode, please share it on social media or with your coworkers, friends, and family. You can also connect with us at Twitter on @EPSANews and on LinkedIn. And we just joined Threads. Follow at Electric Power Supply. And subscribe, follow, leave a rating or comment on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Pandora, Google, or wherever you listen to podcasts.
Energy Solutions is brought to you by the Electric Power Supply Association. EPSA represents America's competitive power suppliers, which bring about 150,000 megawatts of power generation resources to customers throughout the United States. Discover the power of competition at www.epsa.org.